Hello everyone, hope everybody is doing great. This video is again a continuation of the videos I have been doing on interviews. I have done quite a few like interview mistakes, opening of interview, the follow-up questions in the end. The middle part was missing, like what exactly is asked in the interview, the whole body of the interview basically, what type of questions are asked. So I won't go into one like questions one by one, like a lot of questions are asked, so I'm not going into that, but we'll be talking about like type of questions and the way these are to be answered. That will kind of give you a good insight of what's expected rather than going into each question, because there can be many questions, and as I said earlier, you can of course find those like type of questions, like different individual questions over the internet through many websites, so you can do that. But for now we will just talk about the types of questions that are usually asked in the big four interviews, probably every interview, because interview structure tends to be same, the way the interviews are conducted, the way the recruiter, the hiring manager tries to assess your competence is more or less same. So the process is more or less same. Like now looking at the types of the questions that are asked in interviews, probably as you might have heard, okay, that like there is technical interview like questions, and then competency based like technical, and then behavioral. So this is the common two things we hear when we talk about interviews, like they assess your skills and they assess your kind of a personal behavior and all this stuff, through strength and all these questions. So this is a common way, but I'll kind of jot that down, those question categories, into three rather than two. So number one is of course like those competency based questions, technical questions. Second being the behavioral, we just said, like those reflecting on your personal behavior, and then third ones are basically those situational based, that let's call them hypothetical, or let's say immersive. This type of questions present a situation, so we'll talk about each of them separately now. Looking at the individual, the first one, the immersive questions, which is basically the hypothetical question, it's basically kind of gives you an opportunity to show your thought process behind it, like how you approach that answer. So let's say somebody told you, uh, you know, uh, this happened, like let's assume you are given a scenario, okay, this situation happens, the client asks you this thing, and now they want to assess from your side, like what would you say and what would you think through that. So in that type of questions you would be devising an approach by yourselves to reach a conclusion. So one of the questions I haven't asked in past, like I don't remember which interview it was, but it's like, okay, the client offered me to stay at their place, like travel by this thing, and travel to that location, and then I have to assess my independence, like and I need to show like what I did assessment. It was not a question like was I independent or not. That would be a simple yes or no question, but it was not that. It was like how would you assess your independence in that scenario. So that scenario was perfectly hypothetical, never seen that, but it kind of reflected like how I would think through that. And these questions are basically just aimed like how candidate basically thinks and tries to approach them, because these things can happen in future in real scenario, real life, and then you need that kind of the thinking power, the thought process, like how you will arrive on decisions. Of course the firms train you when you're onboarded, but you need to have some thought process behind that, as how it will assess, how it will impact your decisions in the future. Second one is basically the competency based, which is also called technical questions, commonly more or less in every interview. So firms usually have two interviews most of them. The first one goes more technical, second one little technical. Of course first one happens with your managers, senior managers, and second one usually partners or directors, or the progression, like. So the first one, the technical one, of course they want to try test your attributes, your knowledge, your skills, all the competencies that are required for that specific job. uh, of course when you see the job requirements, they listed like they need this experience, this expertise, this skills, etc. And this technical questions, they of course try to highlight those kind of expertise, those uh, things they want to assess from you. If you have those skills, and these questions kind of involve kind of asking uh, you know different situations, what should you do on your client engagements in terms of any technical areas, how you resolve any complex issues, working on tough deadlines, etc. There can be many questions there. Questions can be from standards as well. You applied any new standard, how you deal with difficult accounting treatment, like it can be anything. It's just the way they want to assess your technical capabilities. And just linking that to the initial introduction, when do you do the introduction, you talk a lot about yourself, like I did this, and you try to highlight some key attributes that are linking to the job description. So you, let's say you said like you did the consolidation for a big group, involved everything, etc. Now these type of question, technical questions, then can be asked as a probing question, like, okay, what do you do in that, and like how did you do that, what were the consideration, all those technical areas covering that. So that's the second big, and that's the most one of the most important areas, like in terms of questions. If you are not technically feasible, they will not hire you really, because they need some skills. Third one is the behavioral, as everybody knows. It's the questions that are probably asked in every interviews, like strengths, your weakness, any other thing on behavior, like how you manage teams, how you manage people, how you manage clients, all those kind of personal based questions. So basically they are trying to assess your kind of how you adapt to different situations, how when situations change. As I said, like the uh, your deadlines just kind of shrink, and you are just working on tough deadlines, like how you manage that, how you manage your teams, how you manage your client management, etc. So those type of questions try to assess that. And again, the aim is it's like what would you do in future if you are faced with those situations. So that's where these questions try to come in, and just again try to talk about your strengths in like how you present them, and like how they link up to any specific skill the recruiter is trying to assess. So these are three major type of questions, and then people try to bifurcate that into motivational questions, situational questions. Now you can try to break them into as many as possible. Nobody is stopping that, but these are the major types, and probably cover most of the interview along with the initial statement, the opening introduction, and then the closing one. So probably covers everything in all together. So this is type of questions. Now there are some techniques in which the questions can be asked basically, and there's one recommended technique, of course. So if I break that into two, which are the obvious techniques, number one is open-ended question, number two is close-ended questions. Now I'll talk about close-ended first, because close-ended first, close-ended is very simple. Close-ended is well, a very bad way to ask the questions. It's not recommended. What I mean by closed way is basically asking a question that just says requires the answer as a yes or no, or something like one word answer, which is not ideal. Let's say you asked somebody, have you done this? That person would say, okay, I have done this. Okay, that's the end of the answer, and doesn't really say anything what they do, how they did it, like what considerations for that, etc. So it shouldn't really be asking those close-ended questions. Doesn't really give an insight of the skills, etc. Now talking about open-ended questions, they are of course the most preferred way of asking the questions. And you know by this question, the recruiter, the hiring manager, just ask like, okay, let's see, you went into this situation, you were faced with this, and then how you approach this, what did you do, and when did you do, all those questions which basically reflect like the candidate needs to speak now, talk about things, talk about facts, talk about what he or she have done in the past. So those are the open questions that doesn't require yes or no answers. They require much more than that. Lead the applicant, the candidate, to talk about it, and then you can obviously assess what they have done. And these type of questions, usually of course there are a lot of guidance out there. When somebody is performing the interviews, they are provided with those, just kind of a briefing, questions. You start like why did you do it, what did you do, and then who, how, all these type of things. The way these questions are asked basically, and again shows the interviewee's kind of thought process on this one. And like these are the two type of questions, and then of course the problem questions come in when somebody asks the interviewee, and the interview responds with the answer. Of course you ask the questions from the transfer as well, questions upon questions, just to get know much more about what's going on and how they do it. So if somebody told like, I have done this, and then you're like, how you did this, why you did this, all these kind of probing questions, which kind of give you more insight of what candidate has done in the past, and tries align with the skills required for the required job. And they are really good questions. The probing questions is always a great technique. You shouldn't just be doing like, okay, I asked a question, I got the answer, and the next question. No, There's always a problem questions are really important. You need to kind of highlight what's going on in more detail. So those are really really wonderful questions. Uh, Now, on all these techniques, all the questions, of course, there are ways to talk about them. Lots of them are on available on internet as well. You want to check, like, let's say the simple questions mean that your strength, your weakness. A lot of things are there on internet. I might talk about it in next videos, but I don't want to go specific on each of the answers because it depends on each individual. But there's a clear technique for answering, especially the competency questions. And this, the content I'm just going to talk about now is basically taken from London School of Economics and Political Sciences, which is LSE. They have this page on the website where they talk about a technique of responding to those competency-based questions, where you are asked kind of show your thought process, how you did it, and then what was the outcome. So basically, what they talk about is the technique being STAR technique, STR technique. By the technique basically means like situation, task, action, and then result. So this is the way they want you to phrase your answer, and they say that the maximum weightage is on actions. So as per the website, 10% kind of impact of your answers is based on situation, 10% on task, 70% on actions, and then 10% on results. So this is the way kind of they try to measure the impact of the answer. And what they mean by this STAR technique is, of course, like situation. You need to think about situation, what was the situation you faced, and talk about it a bit rather than just going through the actions. You talk about situation. Let's say I was faced with this deadline at this time. So you talk about situation. Now, what was the task, the objective of that situation, that the outcome you wanted? So you know when we talk about the situation being I was faced with this urgent deadline, like what was the aim? You wanted to finalize the, let's say, financial statements, the getting through the review process, let's say. So you had that task, that was your task. Now, what actions? The third one is actions, which is the highest impact, 70%. So it just asks like, what did you do now to tackle those actions? So, and then what your role in this? So of course, if you are leading a team, what you did, what your team did, how you manage the whole process. So it shows the actions, what you took, and to talk about them like in a kind of a synchronized way, like what you did first, and then of course not going to detail because single question, but talking about things, what you did, what you did not, and then what skills you highlighted in that action. In every answer you need to be very smart. You need to highlight, just don't bore anyone. You need to highlight what you did, and smartly highlight your skills you demonstrated. Let's say you manage the team in that process and got the review done. You manage the client management, you manage the partner and director, etc. So all these things you can demonstrate in your action, like what you did, and of course the result, what was the result. And of course you can talk about I was successful in meeting my objectives, getting the outcome as required, getting the review done, for example, in our case. And that's like kind of a 10% weightage. Overall, 70% is what actions you took. That's your thought process, what you think, how did you get your work done, all that stuff. So that's really important from that perspective. Now, I guess this is kind of a short guidance of like how interview questions are there and like how to answer them. Of course, as I said earlier, there's a lot of guidance available online, talking about a lot of different questions asked in Big Four. Now, I don't really ask like remembering everything. Of course, you can't, but as I said in my earlier videos as well, you need to think about situations, real life situations you faced in past, and then building your answers around that and practicing them ahead of actual interviews. And by practicing, I don't mean like just remembering everything. It's more like you need to kind of think through, okay, this situation comes in, I had this scenario in my mind and I can talk about it. So that's the way you just need to prepare. Otherwise, I guess a couple of videos are there on my page as well, so you can watch them and kind of get to know a bit more about the whole process. And I wish you best of luck in interviews.